That was the reaction at the Vatican this afternoon as the Catholic Church announced its cardinals have elected a new pope. We don't know who it is yet, but we'll update you as the show goes on. I'm Helena, aka No Justice MTG, and tonight I'm joined by Stephen Methven. Stephen, a new pope, how does that make you feel?
Oh, Helena, the pomp, the circumstance, the intrigue and the drama. I feel all of that. But I also feel renewed, as it were, the eternal wisdom of getting a bunch of gay men, putting them in full glam and asking them to organize something, because that is what you're going to get.
Very much so. And also I'd like to say it's excellent to be doing the show with you again, Stephen, but from the other chair this time. Been a partners very many times, and it's good to be joining you again. Coming up this evening, I'll be joined later by Carla Denyer to talk about why she's not running in the next Green Party leadership contest. Later in the show, the impact of AI tools on university education and the open letter signed by former Eurovision contestants calling for Israel to be barred from participating. This afternoon, US President Donald Trump unveiled a quote-unquote comprehensive trade deal with the UK. Here he is speaking to UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer by phone to announce the deal.
I'm thrilled to announce that we have reached a breakthrough trade deal with the United Kingdom, incredible country. Today is a victory day for World War II. We won the war together exactly 80 years ago, so there could be no more perfect morning to reach this historic agreement. And it's beautiful weather out. I will tell you that, Keir, beautiful weather. It's so perfect outside. But it's really, in particular, the agreement with one of our closest and most cherished allies. And we're so happy that that's the way it worked out. I want to thank Prime Minister Starmer and his very talented team for their outstanding work and partnership. Today's agreement with the UK is the first in a series of agreements on trade that my administration has been negotiating over the past 4 weeks. With this deal, the UK joins the United States in affirming that reciprocity and fairness is an essential and vital principle of international trade.
Trump then went on to outline some of the details of what's in the deal for the United States.
The deal includes billions of dollars of increased market access for American exports, especially in agriculture, dramatically increasing access for American beef, ethanol, and virtually all of the products produced by our great farmers. And our Secretary, as you know, of Agriculture is here. Brooke, thank you very much for being here.
Good day. Thank you, sir.
You'll let the farmers know. In addition, the UK will reduce or eliminate numerous non-tariff barriers that unfairly discriminated against American products. But this is now turning out, I think, really to be a great deal for both countries, because it'll be really great for the UK also. So they're opening up the country. Their country is a little closed, and we appreciate that. They'll also be fast-tracking American goods through their customs process, so our exports go to a very, very quick form of approval, and there won't be any red tape. Things are going to move very quickly both ways. The final details are being written up in the coming weeks. We'll have it all very conclusive, but the actual deal is a very conclusive one. We think just about everything's been approved.
The agreement has been years in the making, and is quite a development given the chaos surrounding US trade after Trump's Liberation Day universal tariff announcement earlier this year. The UK has a trade deficit with the United States, so avoided larger tariffs at that point and was hit with the baseline 10% tariff applied to all other countries with a trade deficit. But if the Starmer administration were hoping for an exemption on this tariff, they'll be sorely disappointed, as they have only managed to negotiate specific rather than universal exemptions. These exemptions will be on aluminium and steel exports to the US, an important victory for Starmer in the wake of the Scunthorpe steel crisis, when the US is a key importer of UK steel by 9% at value. There was also a carve-out for UK cars, our biggest UK export, reducing the product-specific tariff on UK cars from 27.5% down to the baseline of 10% for the first 100,000 units exported to the United States. So far, so good. However, the key issue is what concessions have been given to the US to secure this deal. One of the key issues has been around the digital services tax, a levy on large social media companies that the Trump team have been trying to exempt their oligarch backers from. However, it looks like this exemption is not on the table for now. Neither are reductions in food standards for American imports either. A big win for the UK government if this holds. This is a vindication of the government's strategy of trying to secure this deal whilst remaining open to other deals elsewhere, a point made by Keir Starmer in a speech at a Jaguar Land Rover plant this afternoon. In recent years, an idea has taken hold that you somehow show your strength by rejecting your allies, that you shut the door, that you put the phone down. I've had plenty of people urging me to do that rather than stay in the room and fight for the interests of our country. And I want to be absolutely crystal clear that this is not how the government operates. It's never how we will operate. We don't storm off, we stay in the room and we negotiate. One thing that didn't go unnoticed was the state of the relationship now compared to what it was before Liberation Day. BBC Economics editor Faisal Islam made this eagle-eyed point on X, the Everything app. The deal is the US trebles tariffs on the UK, and in return, the UK cuts tariffs by 2/3. This is from Lutnick's chart in the White House. And there we see a chart showing exactly how the tariff arrangement has changed over the last 5 months, with UK tariffs going down from 5.1% to 1.8%, but US tariffs going up from 10% to 3.4%. I don't know about you, but I would feel a little miffed if my new trade partner was boasting about this. This was also seized upon by Starmer's opposition in Westminster, Kemi Badenoch, yes, she does still exist, who criticised the Prime Minister early today. When Labour negotiates, Britain loses. We cut our tariffs, America tripled theirs. Keir Starmer called this historic. It's not historic, we've just been shafted. I'm sure, however, the government will not be too concerned with the opinions of the previous Business and Trade Secretary, who couldn't even get a deal through before the trade war of the last few months. Keir Starmer hit back at critics of the tripled tariffs in his press conference when questioned by the BBC political editor Chris Mason.
Prime Minister, this is a freeing up of trade conditions with America compared with where we were, but is it better than, say, 6 months ago, given, for instance, some tariffs are still there?
Well, Chris, the question you should be asking is it better than where we were yesterday? And I think if you should come out when you finished asking me questions and talk to the workforce here, because what this does is to reduce to zero the tariffs on steel and aluminium. Look how important that is. Reduces massively from 27.5% to 10% the tariffs on the cars that we export. So important to JLR, actually to the sector generally, but JLR in particular, who sell so many cars into the American market, proudly do that. And of course, it also includes pharmaceuticals, some really important measures. Obviously, we don't have tariffs yet, but we've got within the deal significantly preferential treatment, whatever happens in the future. So this is hugely important for our pharmaceutical sector as well. In addition to that, we said we had red lines on standards, particularly in agriculture. We've kept to those standards. The SPS red line is a red line that's written into the agreement. And so I think if you put that package together, you can see that it's a significant step in the right direction for our country and our national interest, and for the very many thousands of jobs that will now be protected, saved and enhanced by the fact that we've done this deal.
In addition to the good news for the Starmer government internationally, there was also some more good news from announced this afternoon, in that the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee has voted to reduce interest rates by 0.25 percentage points. Here is Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, announcing this decision this afternoon.
The disinflation process in the UK economy has continued. UK inflation was 2.6% in the latest data for March. That's above our 2% target, but it's a little bit lower than expected. So with the progress we have made, we can take another step in making monetary policy less restrictive. So today we've cut bank rate by 0.25 percentage points to 4.25%. As the past few weeks demonstrate, the global economic environment remains an uncertain one. Interest rates are not on autopilot. They cannot be. Instead, the MPC must continue to respond carefully to the evolving economic circumstances and the outlook for inflation in the UK. Whatever happens, the MPC will continue to set bank rate to ensure that inflation returns sustainably to the 2% target in the medium term.
This is welcome news for the government, as it will ease both pressures on UK borrowers, especially mortgage holders who were stung by the hiking of rates during Liz Truss's brief time as Prime Minister, and on the UK government's finances, as lower interest rates will mean the cost of servicing government debt will be down. Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves has had a tough time in recent months as trade turmoil has led to a spike in gilt yields, the interest paid on government bonds almost wiping out her so-called fiscal headroom, i.e. the spare spending power she has available while staying within her self-imposed fiscal rules. Today's interest rate cut will likely increase her fiscal headroom, although it's not all good news. Here again is Andrew Bailey, this time discussing UK growth.
My second key message is that a small margin of slack has opened up in the UK economy, and we expect it to widen over the next couple of years. Heightened uncertainty, weak productivity growth, and the continued restrictive stance of monetary policy have all been weighing on GDP growth recently. Businesses have been cautious about investing. That's the message we're getting. And while real household incomes have risen quite strongly, consumption has not followed suit. This weakness in demand has coincided with continued weakness in the potential supply capacity of the UK economy. Productivity growth has been weak. Nevertheless, labour market developments, survey indicators of capacity utilisation and statistical estimates all suggest that weaker demand has led to a small margin of economic slack opening up. Looking through data volatility, we expect underlying GDP growth to remain subdued in the near term before economic activity starts to pick up later this year as household spending and business investment recover, supported by a downward path for interest rates.
So the mythical growth that the government has been chasing still not on the horizon, and having to rely on monetary policy to stimulate it for later in the year is a suggestion that the current government fiscal and regulatory policy has not been conducive to growth so far. Stephen, last month Keir Starmer was proclaiming the end of globalization, but now we have 2 trade deals in 2 days, and yet still growth is elusive. Is Starmer going in the right direction?
It's a good question. I mean, I guess the first question is, what is the direction? Because, as you say, there seems to be a little bit of swinging from side to side here. I guess the way that he'll be able to pitch this is that he's satisfying both the quest for new growth as well as reindustrialization, because the industries that he's protected, steel and manufacturing, kind of fit with or that this deal protects to a larger extent, fits with the idea of reindustrialization, whereas trade deals are a way of stimulating growth. So he'll be able to say, look, I'm doing both at the same time. I think, though, what's really interesting about this deal is the politics of it. And we should say as well, it's not actually a done deal yet, even though Trump in his phone call said it had all been approved. There are a lot of details to be hashed out, and there are a lot of mixed messaging in that broadcast. So, for example, on the US side, they said all of American agriculture would now be able to be imported by the UK, whereas on our side, we said it's just beef, and also that we wouldn't be lowering our food standards in order to accommodate more American beef. And that's important because the UK is also currently trying to do a trade deal with Europe, and Europe demands high standards. So there won't be much movement there. So yeah, the details are not all entirely clear. But yeah, on the politics of it, I mean, it's really interesting because it comes at a moment when you have 2 world leaders who are really overhyped beyond their ability. So on the one hand, you've got Keir Starmer, who sort of swung into power in the last election. A lot of people very happy that the grown-ups are back in the room, and yet hasn't really achieved very much. You've got Donald Trump, also voted in with a huge vote share in the last US election, who then tipped the world on end with his tariffs, where it seems as though the reaction to that was something that none of his administration expected. And both of these things have hit these leaders very hard. So Keir Starmer is obviously reeling from extremely bad, historically bad local election results last week. Donald Trump has been flailing in the polls. He's had a very small bump recently, but the general consensus in the US has been that in order to regain some momentum or to raise his approval, he would have to start making deals soon. So this deal comes at a really important time for both sides of it, because it looks like some action, and combined with the India trade deal that was signed yesterday, it looks like quite a lot of action on the side of Keir Starmer. For Trump, as I say, the general opinion had been if there weren't deals soon, he would continue to slump in the polls. And one indicative sign of this, I think, is that just a few days ago, maybe last week, it was reported that Britain had been downgraded to a sort of tier 2 or tier 3 trading partner in terms of finding a new deal, because obviously it was a bigger announcement for the US to make that it had secured a deal with a massive bloc like India or the EU. But Britain's independence from the EU and from other trading partners has meant that it can move a bit faster. And I guess with the kind of historic anniversary today, the VE Day anniversary, it sort of created a kind of confluence of circumstances that meant, okay, let's announce something which is going to happen. We don't have to hammer out the details that will serve both of us, both Trump and Starmer, who are currently floundering with their electorate.
This summer, the Green Party will be running a leadership contest, and earlier this week we spoke to Green Party Deputy Leader Zach Polanski after he announced his bid for the top job. But today we learned who won't be running, and that's current co-leader Carla Denyer, who has made this announcement.
Today, after many months of careful consideration and steered as I always am by how can I make the biggest difference, I'm announcing that in the leadership election this summer, I will not be restanding as leader, to allow me to pour all of my skills, passion and energy into the positive and exciting things that I want to achieve in Parliament and in Bristol Central, including action to end the affordable housing crisis, tackle the climate emergency and campaign against racism and xenophobia.
It's difficult to overestimate the impact of Denyer's leadership, along with that of co-leader Adrian Ramsey, has had on the Green Party's position in the UK politics since their election in 2021. The 2024 general election took the Greens' parliamentary representation from 1 MP to 4, with wins for Sian Berry and Carla Denyer in urban seats and for Adrian Ramsey and Ellie Chowns in rural constituencies. It also saw the Greens achieve by far their best ever vote share in a general election, with nearly 7% of the popular vote. That was just under 2 million ballots cast for the party. And in local elections, they've skyrocketed, with the most recent ones taking them to over 800 councillor seats. And the party has momentum, with 1 in 5 Britons saying they consider voting Green in a future election. That figure includes a third of Labour voters. It's quite a record, one of the most impressive in recent politics, and I'm delighted to be joined by Carla Denyer this afternoon. Carla, why are you stepping back from the leadership now?
You've summed up some of it for me, really. I stood for election with Adrian in 2021 on a platform of turning the Green Party into a serious election-winning machine, growing the party, diversifying it, and I'm proud and Adrian's proud of what we've achieved in that. So from my perspective, I feel good. I've achieved what I set out to do, and I now want to pour all of my energy and enthusiasm into the projects that I've got going in Parliament and of course for my constituents in Bristol Central. And as I said in that video clip that you included at the start, that includes the affordable housing crisis, which is a major issue here in Bristol. Also the climate, as you would expect. And I've got a particular project that we might want to chat about, if you like, around just transition that I'll be laying a bill on next week in Parliament. And immigration. I lead the Greens on immigration. I've been challenging the government really strongly on their continuation of the hostile environment, and I'll be continuing to work on that with a report coming out in a couple of months.
Yeah, and with regards to things like the just transition, at the last election, the Greens were basically the only party to recognise how essential a new economic model is, and you kind of remain the only party to see that. Why is that, do you think?
Gosh, that's one of those I wish I knew questions. Yeah, it is frustrating that this Labour government, who, given their history, you might hope for better, are not putting workers first in the transition to net zero. It feels like they're lurching from one crisis to another with the Scunthorpe Steelworks, with net zero, and they are failing to counter the incredibly pernicious disinformation from Reform, who are trying to say that climate action doesn't benefit the ordinary person, in fact, that it'll cost them, when actually nothing could be further from the truth. But that is, it is on the Labour government, because people are not wrong to feel angry and let down by Labour and the Conservatives. And so I can understand why some people are turning to Reform, because they feel totally let down and ignored. It reminds me of during the Brexit referendum that woman who infamously shouted out from the crowd, "But that's your GDP, that's not mine." It feels like both parties have been pursuing a top line number of increasing economic growth without considering what effect that actually has on people's jobs and people's living standards. And unfortunately, so far, Reform have been fairly successful in starting to sell the lie that climate action is in some way going to be a disadvantage to workers when, I mean, you only have to follow the money to see what Reform are up to. They've received £2.3 million in donations since the 2019 general election, and the vast majority of that money has come from fossil fuel interests, major polluters, and climate change deniers. So they are not making decisions. They are not pushing policies for the benefit of ordinary people. They're doing that to benefit their donors, to benefit the super rich, not the rest of us. And so I see a big part of my job and the job of the Greens in Parliament to put the pressure on the Labour government to get us to net zero, but to do it in a way that doesn't feel like doing policies to people, that includes people in the transition. And that's what the bill that I'm laying in Parliament next week seeks to do by mandating that workers will have a say in how the just transition happens to a greater extent, to hardwire collective bargaining into the just transition, and to require companies operating in the oil and gas sector to have a just transition plan.
And that's the thing, right? That was the big mistake. I guess the big failure of the Thatcherite transition was that we left it all up to the market. We just said we're going to get rid of these industries. I'm not saying that coal should have stayed forever, but there was no industrial strategy to take workers with them and give these people and these communities new jobs and new industries to be able to maintain the prosperity of these areas of the country. And we're seeing the fallout now with these post-industrial communities kind of falling away from Labour. Reform are part of this kind of big kind of shifting of the tectonic plates in British politics, which have shifted considerably in only the last 10 months since the election. Now, putting potentially climate issues to one side, or potentially including in that, where should the Green Party be shifting its focus to moving forward, given how the Reform UK have changed the shape of UK politics?
Picking up on part of that before I answer the substantive question, the frustrating thing about the way frankly, Labour and the Conservatives are giving in, dancing to Reform's tune on climate as on immigration and other issues, is that the public are more keen on climate action than they've ever been. There was this really interesting research that was published in The Guardian a week or two ago under the badge of the 89% Project, because they worked with international partners, they did this huge representative survey, 130,000 people, which showed that globally, 89% of people want governments to go faster on tackling climate change. And they want that even if it would cost them more. Now, if you design the policies right, it doesn't need to. But the point is that when I say, oh, but people want climate action, right-wing politicians tend to sort of smarmily respond, oh, yeah, until it costs them money. No, the research shows that a surprisingly high proportion of respondents would be willing to see an increase in their taxation to pay for climate action. But if you design the policies right, that's not necessary. And that's why the Greens have been saying for years and years, let's have a fair tax system where the super rich, the multimillionaires and billionaires are paying more, not those on the lowest incomes. And that's why it makes me so sick and so angry to see this Labour government putting extra struggles onto the back of the poorest, on the backs of disabled people, and claiming that they've got no other option, when in fact Rachel Reeves is standing there with one hand tied behind her back because she's refusing to consider options like introducing a wealth tax.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that one thing I usually hear as a Green Party member myself, by trying to extol the virtues of the party, is people saying things like, well, the Green Party, they're not going to have interest in making my money go further. When that can be further from the truth, right? Energy abundance is how we make our economy grow further and faster to be able to make everyday people and businesses better off. And continuing to invest in things like green energy is the way that we're going to be able to get people's money to go further and bring down bills for everyone. I absolutely agree. And And most people, not only in terms of support for climate action, but environmentalism as a philosophy is one of the most kind of popular when polled in the country. So I absolutely agree with you on everything there. One thing what I would ask is, when you look back on your leadership of the Green Party, which of your many accomplishments will you be most proud of?
Ooh, oh God, I'm absolutely terrible at what's your favourite something or other question. I think it has to be the general election performance. Adrian and I were really clear from the off, and I have to give massive credit and thanks to Adrian for this, because I really think that it was his drive and experience. He'd been deputy leader of the party previously, and he's been the CEO of a couple of charities. His drive and his organisational experience that helped the party to have that relentless focus, which obviously I was fully signed up to as well. And because we're a small party, albeit small but rapidly growing, the way that we win seats in the unfair first past the post system is to focus. And so we said from the start, we're going to get 4 MPs elected, and we achieved that by focusing so hard. And yeah, I think there were lots of people inside and outside the party saying, oh, but shouldn't you have 6? Shouldn't you have 10? Why don't you target this place with an unpopular Labour MP? And the response was, we would love to, but the way we get there is by biting off manageable chunks. And that's our experience on local councils as well, that very often you get the first 1 or 2 councillors elected on a council, and then it can grow quite rapidly from there. And so I was really excited last year after the general election to see that not only, of course, did we get our 4 Green MPs elected, but that we came second in a whopping 40 constituencies. And to be honest with you, we didn't do that much campaigning in those 40 constituencies. So that is a second place with people coming to the Greens without having, most of them, the opportunity to speak to a Green Party volunteer on the doorstep, knocking on their door, talking to them, to have received much literature from us and so on. So that's really, really positive. I do take that as a vote of confidence somewhat in our Green Party leadership, and it's certainly a sign that this is far from the ceiling of our ambition. There's lots of potential to grow. And although I'm not going to be re-standing as co-leader, I absolutely am looking forward to being a really big part of the Green Party's future. I'll just be contributing to that in a slightly different way as a really hard-working MP that's really like a dog with a bone on these issues that I know people care about in my constituency and beyond.
Perfect. And one last point I'd like to make on a personal note is I'd like to thank you myself for how fierce of an ally you've been to the trans community since this kind of hostile environment has come into this country's political discourse over the last kind of months and years. So I just want to thank you personally for that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. As you probably know, I'm a queer woman, but I hope I would be an ally whether I was or not. It's really important to me. It's really clear that trans people are at the sharp end of a nasty culture war, and all of us have to do what we can to stand up for trans people. I wanted to share a little bit of good news. You may have seen it already. Yesterday, MPs voted on amendments to the Data Use and Access Bill, which sounds very dry, but unfortunately, some Conservatives were trying to push an amendment that would basically force trans people to out themselves multiple times a day. When you book a holiday, when you hire a car, when you set up an account online, like all of the gender collection in any kind of form would only collect biological sex. So we Greens opposed that. Fortunately, the Labour government opposed it as well. I know that there was quite a lot of doubt and concern in the trans community that given the government's response to the Supreme Court ruling and the EHRC advice, are they going to flip-flop on this? But fortunately, they didn't. So, in fact, that transphobic amendment from the Conservatives was defeated by a large margin. And I just thought it would be nice to end this interview by sharing that good bit of news for anyone that hadn't heard it yet.
Yeah, we take the wins as they come, especially in these times.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us, Carla, this evening.
Thank you.
An article published in New York Magazine has made a bit of a splash. It belongs in a familiar genre, the one that says, guess what? The kids are not okay. The claim is that everyone is cheating their way through university and that ChatGPT has unraveled the entire academic project. Of course, that begs the question, what is the academic project? The article begins with the story of Chung-In Roy Lee. He'd been accepted to Harvard, but the place he had been withdrawn after he'd been briefly suspended from school. Eventually, after lots of failed applications, he managed to get a place at another Ivy League university, Columbia in New York, where he studied computer science. But here's how Lee says he dealt with his assignments. I just dump the prompt into ChatGPT and hand in whatever it spat out. At the end, I'd be put on the finishing touches. I just insert 20% of my humanity, my voice, into it. Most of my assignments in college are not relevant. They're hackable by AI, and I just had no interest in doing them. Not all students are as dependent on AI as Lee. The article also reports the case of Wendy saying this. Wendy, a freshman finance major at one of the city's top universities, told me that she is against using AI. Or, she clarified, I'm against copy and pasting. I'm against cheating and plagiarism. All of that. It's against the student handbook. Then she described, step by step, how on a recent Friday at 8 a.m., she called up an AI platform to help her write a 4 to 5 page essay due 2 hours later. Whenever Wendy uses AI to write an essay, which is to say, whenever she writes an essay, she follows 3 steps. Step 1, I say, I'm a first-year college student. I'm taking this English class. Otherwise, Wendy said, it will give you a very advanced, very complicated writing style, and you don't want that. Step 2, Wendy provides some background on the class she's taking before copy and pasting her professor's instructions into the chatbot. Step 3, then I ask, according to the prompt, can you please provide me an outline or an organization to give me a structure so that I can follow and write my essay? It then gives me an outline, introduction, topic sentences, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3. Sometimes, Wendy asks for a bullet list of ideas to support or refute a given argument. I have a difficulty with organization, and this makes it really easy for me to follow. The article also explores all the ways that lecturers try to detect students using AI, but the conclusion is pretty much, they can't. Here's one bit on how useless detection tools are. I fed Wendy's essay through a free AI detector, 0GPT, and it came back as 11.74% AI generated, which seemed low, given that AI at the very least had generated her central arguments. I then fed a chunk of text from the book of Genesis into 0GPT, and it came back as 93.33% AI generated. Now, if you think this is just a problem with the humanities, think again. This is also from the article. Generative AI chatbots, ChatGPT, but also Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, Microsoft's Copilot, and others, take their notes during class, devise their study guides and practice tests, summarize novels and textbooks, and brainstorm, outline, and draft their essays. STEM students are using AI to automate their research and data analyses and to sail through dense coding and debugging assignments. College is just how well I can use ChatGPT at this point. A student in Utah recently captioned a video of herself copying and pasting a chapter from a genocide and mass atrocity textbook into ChatGPT. For many of the lecturers interviewed in the piece, the upshot of massive AI use in education isn't just about gaming the system. One said this, massive numbers of students are going to emerge from university with degrees and into the workforce who are essentially illiterate, both in the literal sense and in the sense of being historically illiterate and having no knowledge of their own culture, much less anyone else's. Other academics thought rampant AI use raised wider employment questions too, with the article saying this. Laksha Jain, a computer science lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley, has been using those questions in an attempt to reason with his students. If you're handing in AI work, he tells them, you're not actually anything different than a human assistant to an artificial intelligence engine, and that makes you very easily replaceable. Why would anyone keep you around? That's not theoretical. The COO of a tech research firm recently asked Jain why he needed programmers any longer. Stephen, this is far more your wheelhouse than mine. What do you think is going to be the real impact of AI on education more broadly?
Well, I think, in that article, there was a professor who talked about how students were going to come out of university illiterate as a result of AI. So not being able to read very well or write very well, but also, as he said, illiterate about culture, their own culture and other people's culture. There may be something in that. I mean, the truth is that students have always cheated, and they've always cheated in pretty undetectable ways. And, the methods of detection have kind of followed technology as it's grown. So, and with the advent of the internet, students were able to access online books, PDFs, whatever, copy and paste from that into their essays in a way that they couldn't have done with books. Software came along that then helped to detect that so that you could spot plagiarism. But you only ever used it. I mean, some people, then got to a stage where like university were just putting everything through anti-plagiarism software. But initially, you only used it when you suspected there was some plagiarism going on. And now you've got AI, which is writing students' essays for them or planning their essays for them. I mean, look, I think it is bad news. It's bad news for those students. Not, I don't want to put it in terms of employment like those that last slide you showed did. Just bad news for spending 3 or 4 years of your life not actually learning anything except how to effectively use AI. And the problem here is not really so much the tool that's being used. It's rather the instrumentalization of education that encourages people to forget about the fact that they're at university, to actually have this like deeply privileged experience of spending 3 or 4 years learning stuff that once you get into work, that will be much, much harder to learn. And that instrumentalization doesn't just happen at universities, although I think it's most rampant there. I think it happens at school. So, very early on, you start thinking about, what your GCSEs will be, and you're thinking about those in terms of what your A levels will be, and you're thinking about those in terms of what degree you'll do, and you're thinking about those in terms of what job you'll eventually do, and what kind of status it has, and how much money you'll make doing it. And as I say, universities have been, as it were, the last step in that process, the most ready to instrumentalize their own industry or their own function in society. So there came a point in the UK when student fees first arose as an issue in universities. And rather than trying to explain the value of a sort of deep, specialized education in a specific field, not just because it's good to know who wrote what, or what the meaning of a certain poem is, or how to run a laboratory experience, or not experiment rather, not for that, but rather that the skills it imparts to you are the ones that you can use in a variety of different fields. So rather than kind of explaining the value of university education in that way, universities immediately went to the economic value of a university degree. So it then became the narrative of the degree was not so much this life-changing experience, but rather, it adds this much economic value to your future prospects in the workplace. And when you start to treat education as a means to some economic output at the end, you invite students to think about it in exactly the same way. So what they're thinking about when they're using AI is not the experience, this privileged experience that they're being given to learn stuff, but rather they're thinking exactly what the universities asked them to think, which is that the value of the degree is the future economic effect it will have on you. And that's it. So if all you're thinking about is getting through to the end, and as it were, getting a kind of qualification, which is not a qualification in terms of learning or the intellect or what kind of skills you have, but rather a kind of necessary qualification for entering the workplace at a sort of slightly higher paid level, or even that's not true anymore. Graduates are their initial wages are dropping extremely quickly. But they were invited to think about degrees in that way, and they're doing exactly what they were invited to do, which is to treat them that way, to treat them as a bunch of hurdles that you have to get through in order to get a degree, which then gets you a certain status in the workplace. So this is really a problem of neoliberalism and of capitalism, of our disregard under those systems for things that are genuinely valuable, or our dispensing with the idea of any kind of value which isn't purely economic values. So yeah, the kids are not okay, but the universities are not okay, and the whole education sector is not okay, because altogether they completely conspire to undermine the value of the thing that they're doing and thinking of it in purely economic terms. And I think this is what you ultimately and quite predictably will get.
Over 70 previous Eurovision contestants have signed an open letter calling for Israel and its media organisation KAN to be banned from the 2025 edition. The EBU is the broadcaster responsible for organising the contest. The letter is directly addressed to them. It states, "We believe in the unifying power of music, which is why we refuse to allow music to be used as a tool to whitewash crimes against humanity. Last year, we were appalled that the EBU allowed Israel to participate while it continued its genocide in Gaza, broadcast live for the world to see. The result was disastrous. Rather than acknowledging the widespread criticism and reflecting on its own failures, the EBU responded by doubling down, granting total impunity to the Israeli delegation while repressing other artists and delegations, making the 2024 edition the most politicized, chaotic, and unpleasant in the competition's history. The 2024 edition of the contest saw widespread boycotts and protests at the decision to allow Israel to compete. That year, their contestant was singer Eden Golan, who had to have her song lyrics edited to remove references to the October the 7th attacks. Over 11,000 people protested that event held in Malmö, Sweden, including Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. Moving on to 2025, the Israeli contestant has been chosen as Yuval Raphael, the survivor of the attack on the Nova Music Festival as part of the Al-Aqsa flood incursion into Israel by Palestinian forces. One of the controversial positions taken by the EBU with regards to the participation of Israel is the perceived hypocrisy of allowing them to compete whilst banning Russia, even since the country's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This was called out directly in the open letter. By continuing to platform the representation of the Israeli state, the EBU is normalizing and whitewashing its crimes. The EBU has already demonstrated that it is capable of taking measures, as in 2022 when it expelled Russia from the competition. We don't accept this double standard regarding Israel. And they're absolutely right. It seems to be that the continual narrative, doesn't matter whether it's Keir Starmer immediately calling out war crimes by Russia and then being able to speak out the other side of his mouth with regards to Israel. The same is true when it comes to international broadcasters and broadcasting cooperatives like the EBU. When it comes to Russia, it's unequivocal. It's unequivocal. We absolutely must condemn. We must exclude them. The sanctions start because they are not outside of the Western sphere of influence. When it comes to Israel, though, we have to let them defend themselves, regardless of whether the war crimes are as widely broadcast and widely known as Russia's are. It's a total double standard. I absolutely agree. Now, the EBU has continued to treat Israel's broadcaster with impunity. In 2024, KAN described Norwegian band Goethe as the sons and daughters of Amalek, a biblical reference that was invoked by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to describe the Palestinians during his declaration of war. KAN is well aware of its role to use cultural events as Eurovision to promote its Hasbara agenda. In December last year, in response to a bill proposed by Israeli Communications Minister Shlomo Karhi to privatize the network, the international news desk editor at a KAN-owned radio station in Israel openly stated that the song contest has long been more than just a musical event. It is a critical arena for Israeli advocacy, and the privatization would be a gift to BDS. He went on to say this: "It is a way to assert our presence on a continent that expelled us 80 years ago and is trying to do it again today through radical left-wing organizations. Does Karhi really want to give the radical left in Europe this prize? Because that's exactly what he's doing." Indeed, many claims that Eurovision is non-political are hard to believe when countries have historically used the contest to promote and signal national narratives, and countries often vote along political lines too. That, however, has not prevented the EBU from censoring pro-Palestine voices historically. This has included cutting out audience boos of Israel during the 2024 edition, asking Irish entry Bambi Thug to remove pro-Palestine and pro-ceasefire messages from their performance, and previously having banned Palestinian flags from the show altogether, although this ban has now been overturned. In response to the open letter, Martin Green, CBE, director of the Eurovision Song Contest, said this: "We understand the concerns and deeply held views around the current conflict in the Middle East. The EBU is not immune to global events, but together with our members, it is our role to ensure that the contest remains, at its heart, a universal event that promotes connections, diversity and inclusion through music. We all aspire to keep the Eurovision Song Contest positive and inclusive and aspire to show the world as it could be rather than how it necessarily is. As a reminder, the EBU is an association of public service broadcasters, not governments, who are all eligible to participate in the Eurovision Song Contest every year if they meet the requisite requirements." Stephen, do you believe that the EBU's position is defensible?
No, it's completely indefensible. It's also sort of like deep liberal claptrap, isn't it? You know, we're committed to universal values of inclusivity and so on and so forth. And yet at the same time, as you said in the piece, Russia is excluded while Israel is allowed to remain in the competition. I mean, I'm actually really surprised that they've been able to sustain it this far. You know, as you said, or as I said in the letter, the previous performers 2024 was really chaotic. It was. I remember watching it. There was a boycott. I'd meant to boycott it. I was in a Butlins with my brother. He wanted to watch it, and I thought, I better watch it because we're going to cover it on the show anyway, because it's obviously going to be chaos. And indeed, it was. Crowds booing, flags stripped off members of the audience, fights between the bands backstage. Nothing in there about the spirit of universality and so on and so forth, but rather a show that really showed the world the level of feeling that there was about Gaza at that point, a level of feeling which has incidentally only grown. So it seems that the EBU's just made a really bad mistake in not trying to get ahead of that for this competition. And the effect of it in this case will be that someone who was a survivor of October the 7th is probably going to find herself booed on stage again, or is going to be greeted with a sea of Palestinian flags, which you are now allowed to carry. Which, if I were Israel, which I'm really glad I'm not, I would be thinking about that person's well-being and safety, and wondering whether it was worth putting someone, presumably quite traumatized, out on stage to perform in front of a crowd which is hostile towards the country that she comes from because of the genocide that they're committing in Gaza. So I don't really know what the EBU's playing at here. I do quite like the idea that this year there's also some solidarity from previous performers. I think it's really great that it's hard for people in the performance world to take a stand on political issues, because so much of their income depends on a wide audience, the possibility of collaborations and of contracts for advertising and this kind of thing. And those are the sorts of things that can easily disappear when you become political. So I think it is great that there are previous performers who've signed this letter, put themselves out there, hopefully enabling the performers who are going to be appearing the weekend after this one in the competition to help them to feel like they have some backing or some courage in making their own displays of protest. I mean, and there were plenty of displays of protest by performers last year. They were, of course, unfortunately, many of them edited out of the cut. So yeah, I think it's going to be a messy show. I mean, I guess it wouldn't surprise me if Israel was quietly dropped after the semi-final. That would be a sort of weak, technocratic, strategic solution to the problem. But yeah, the EBU really ought to have taken a stand of the kind it took against Russia, and the hypocrisy and inconsistency is just apparent to everybody.
What's funny to me about this whole thing is we're talking about the European Song Contest and including a state in the Middle East in the European Song Contest. I mean, like a Eurovision Song Contest, rather. Obviously, it's European in nature. Of course, I understand that there are other non-European countries who do compete as well. But Stephen, what do you think that the inclusion of Israel, kind of prima facie, in a what is supposed to be a European contest, says about its relationship broadly with the West?
Yeah, I mean, it says quite a lot, and it's interesting that there's I think it's only two non-European countries that are included, which are Israel and Australia, two settler colonial states, but extensions of Europe in that very obvious respect. In a sense, it says that about Europe and its relation to colonies. I actually don't mind if more countries are included. I would like to see the whole Middle East included. I'd like to see, why not make it a global competition? Why restrict it to Europe? But given that it is restricted to Europe, it's pretty telling that those two countries are allowed to be in it, whereas a country like Lebanon, which is geographically even nearer, just isn't.
Let me check what we've got updates on the Pope for you. Okay, interesting, this one. Vice President J.D. Vance said during a Fox News interview on January the 29th, there is a Christian concept that you love your family and then you love your neighbour. And then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens. And then after that, prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that. And then we've got this tweet from Robert Prevost, who is the elected post, to say, J.D. Vance is wrong. Jesus doesn't ask us to rank our love for others, which should say something about the kind of future political positions of this new first American Pope. Interesting that they've already taken a stand against the elected American vice president, which should at least give us some interesting interactions between those two to come. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me this evening for tonight's show.
Thanks very much for having me on, Helena. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.